So our panel today is very uniquely poised to be able to tell us about energy's hottest sector in Asia. And let me introduce our very distinguished speakers. Our first speaker will be Dr. Wandi Kunchonyan-kun. Our second speaker will be Christopher Beaufet and Rahul Sankhe. Dr. Wandi is the CEO of SPCG, and she's the president of Solar Power Company Limited, Thailand's first and largest solar farm developer. Dr. Wandi is the recipient of numerous awards, including most recently from the United Nations for her work in renewable energy. Chris Beaufet, here to my right, is the president of Asia, Pacific, and China for Vestas, which is a very famous and venerable Danish company that's a global leader in wind energy. He graduated from the US Naval Academy. He has extensive leadership in the public and the private sectors, much of it in the US and China. Before joining Vestas, Mr. Beaufet served as the president and general manager of GE Aviation in Greater China. Finally, Mr. Rahul Sankhe is the managing director for solar energy for SunEdison in India. Mr. Sankhe, who graduated from the prestigious Indian Institute of Technology, also holds several advanced degrees, and he has an extensive background in clean tech and climate change. He also held senior positions at McKinsey and also in the United States in the semiconductor industry. We're very fortunate to have these three leaders in alternative energy who have extensive experience in Asia and elsewhere at this forum today. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to begin by asking each of our panelists to give a brief 3 to 5 minute introduction. Dr. Wandi, would you like to begin?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. And I have to do my duty as the Thai and way of Thainess as the Prime Minister instruction this morning. So welcome all of you to our country. So then Thailand is considered center of ASEAN. And we are surrounded by love from Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, Malaysia, Indonesia. So then you choose the right place to set up your forum this year. And next year we are going to be ASEAN community, so 10 countries, 650 million people with a single market, you know. And so this is going to be important time, and it's so exciting to join ASEAN next year. So I myself, actually, I stopped working since 2006, 2007, and I come back again. In 2009, I come back to business again. So when I stopped my business, I thought that, you know, as being a woman, we need to keep up our beauty. And because every day we grow, our beauty getting less and less. So then, but in 2009, the government announced the policy to buy back the solar energy from private sector, and they open up the opportunity, what they call VSPP, very small power producer. So for solar, they give what they call adder, so adding the amount with the base tariff. For solar, they gave at 8 baht per kilowatt hour. And the announcement has been placed for like 10 months. No one interested and no one submit any application to utilities company. So then I happened to meet with many of the minister and the one that implement this policy, Dr. Piyasawat. So he asked me, you know, please, since I'm a jobless person at that time, so then please go look into the business model and see why, you know, nobody interested in doing this business. So then took me like 1 month, and I think I can do it, you know. So then now is I submit one application to utility, which is PEA, Provincial Energy Authority of Thailand. And they're so happy when I walk into the PEA. So then they say that, oh, nobody submit any application for solar. They want me to get like 36 projects. So actually, if I take 1,000 megawatts, I can take, but I decide to take only like 260 megawatts. If I can make the first one success, then we can see the future of solar. So I feel that solar energy is clean and is endless energy, and is going to be important if we can make the solar energy happen in this country. So then I start talking to the banks, and so then it's so difficult, with the first negotiation with the bank. Since this is a brief introduction for 3 minutes, so then I should, give a second round of the explanation. So then when I started in 2010, is only 2 megawatts that of solar has been grid connected. But today, we plan to see 3,000 megawatts. So then this is a big change, a big move of alternative energies. And government can see that solar energy can become one of the energy security of our country. So they now put solar energy in the power development plan, which is the plan to develop for the whole country. So then in the next 20 years. So then this is what happened from the last 5 years till now. So it changed my life a lot. I lost a lot of my beauty. From the past 5 years, I gained weight. I never have time to rest. So this is what the brief story about me.
Mr. Rahul, would you like to continue?
Well, it's an honor and privilege to be here. Thanks for inviting me to this forum. I work for SunEdison in India. Have been with them for the last 5 years, ever since the start of the SunEdison business here in Asia, in India and Asia. India is also the regional headquarters for SunEdison. For those who may not know, SunEdison is today one of the leading renewable energy companies globally. Started off as a solar energy company. In fact, actually, we go back way back to 1959. The roots are more in silicon manufacturing. So, but then we've transitioned over to becoming more an energy company over the last 5 years. But on the solar side, we do everything right from producing polysilicon, which is essentially the oil of solar, to building, financing, and operating solar power plants. So as of today, we have close to 4,000 megawatts of solar power, plus now wind as well, capacity that we operate and manage across 20 countries. And we have close to 6,000 megawatts under development that we expect to construct over the next 2 to 3 years. So it's, I have been fortunate actually to be part of this growth of renewable energy in the last 5 years, to see it from the hot seat. In 2010, when we started in India, the government was just talking about the policy, and I was working with McKinsey at that point in time, and we had a request from the Prime Minister's office to do some pro bono work for them to shape the solar vision for the country. And we actually ended up doing, coming up with certain standard analysis that we do, and we have a very strong, we as in at that time McKinsey used to have a very strong solar practice. So McKinsey had a point of view on where solar costs are likely to be in 10 years' time. Based on that, we gave a recommendation to the government that the target should be 20,000 megawatts, 20 to 30,000 megawatts in 2020. And at that time, the total capacity in India was all of 0 in the country. And solar was quite expensive, close to 35 to 40 cents per kilowatt hour. So we, McKinsey was quite, our recommendations were ridiculed by many in the government. But thankfully, we had a strong supporter in the Prime Minister himself, and one of the gentlemen who was leading this initiative to draft the National Solar Mission, as they call it, for India. So that, thankfully got adopted, and with that vision, it started off. Incidentally now, the number that was 20,000 megawatts, which was being ridiculed at that point in time, now the government has come up with a new vision. The new government is extremely aggressive. They want to do 100,000 megawatts or 100 gigawatts of solar by 2020. So you can see how things have changed. And as Anne says, it's indeed the hottest sector. Just to give you one fact, the International Energy Agency predicts that over the next 20 years, the conventional capacity addition will be 2.2 terawatts or 2,200 gigawatts, and renewables will be close to 3 terawatts or 3,000 gigawatts of capacity. So you're clearly seeing a crossover from conventional to renewables across the world, and of that, 2/3 of that capacity will actually be added in emerging markets, and a lot of it in Asia.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Very nice to see such a large crowd interested in alternative energy. And it's also nice to see we have a very good mix of solar that is now also going wind, so maybe there's an idea there. And then, of course, a wind company. And so what I thought I'd talk just a little bit about Vestas. Some people know, some people do not. So it is the largest wind turbine company globally. We've been in business for more than 35 years in this sector. The company's been around longer than that. Have installed more than 60 gigawatts of turbines globally. Just in the last few years have opened up more than 35 different countries to wind. And so a long history of working with both entrepreneurs, governments, companies, state-owned enterprises to open wind up. I'm a firm believer in that as much as we all want to be green, there has to be another side to green. If you cannot make money in it in the long term, it does not last for the long term. And I think what we're seeing is over the last 35 years, the cost of energy of renewables continues to come down, and it can therefore really compete, particularly in areas of the world where you have growing energy demand and you're installing new power generation. Solar, wind, renewables can compete head-to-head with the traditional fossil fuels, and then many times is actually much cheaper. And that's the environment that we're living in today, and that's why I believe we're seeing so many of the projections showing alternative energy as really the hot new sector. And then on top of being able to make money, you're doing it with no CO2 emissions, you're doing it with a much more conscious effort to both the environment but also to energy security of the countries that install renewables. So I think this is a really great time to be talking about alternative energy. Very happy to be here in Thailand to do so and look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to start out with some questions for the panelists, and then at the end we'll take maybe 10, 15 minutes for questions from the floor. So start thinking about your questions. So I'd like to go back to Dr. Wandi. Dr. Wandi, we've already touched on this a little bit, but can you tell us more about why alternative energy market is so important for Asia's future?
Yes, maybe I just want to, Asia is a bit too big. Let's talk on like ASEAN. So for example, 10 countries, 650 million people. Thailand, 65 million people that we have energy consumption total around 33,000 megawatts. And 70% producing by gas, energy produced by gas. So then in the next 5 to 7 years, we are facing challenge on shortage of gas from the Gulf of Thailand. So we have to fight with Japan and Singapore to import LNG to replace the natural gas. So then this is conventional, right? So natural gas, oil, or coal. So this is something that we cannot control on the price. And so far the LNG cost that we consider is almost double the price of our gas from Gulf of Thailand. So this will reflect in the energy price in the future, and it will reflect economies in general, in industry and every sectors. So Thai governments are very strong in supporting the alternative energies, and such as solar, wind, whatever we can help is to reduce using gas. So then that's why renewable energy plan come out just recently, a few years ago, after we developed the first project. So and alternative energies such as biomass, biogas is also causing pollution. So when people start to construct biomass in this country, if they just say to the local people, oh, I want to start biomass, so then it will be a big protest from the local people because of pollution. So when I want to start my solar farm, my solar power plant, so I have to change the words a bit. So I don't call power plant, I call solar farms. So then local people will ask me, what do I grow, you know, from my solar farm. So this is 5 years ago, we have to do a little bit public hearing to educate people how does it work. And so this is very important for ASEAN, other ASEAN countries. If you look at Myanmar today, so around 60 million people, they have like 3,000 megawatts. 3,000 megawatts, and 2/3 of the Myanmar people still live without energy. So then if you look at like Indonesia, which is about 200 million people, 1/3 of them still live in the area where they cannot access energy. So this is very important to get the renewable energy or any alternative energy to mix with the conventional, and to help, you know, getting people out of poverty, things like that. When I started to develop the first solar farm, so I have to educate the banks. As we talked before, I walked to 10 banks in this country, and so they all say no to me. And the way they nicely explain is there is no policy to support, to finance the solar energy in this country. So then I said to all the banks I walked to, you just change the policy. If you don't have the policy, then you change the policy, then you can make it happen. So then no one listened. So I walked to the last bank. Their color is green. So I said to them, if you don't lend me the money, you have to go change the color. And I think many Thai people can say, you know, which bank. So it's actually Kasikorn Bank, and is a lot of process that we have to walk through with the bank. Took us like 1 year to develop the first project, and they asked me to hire many legal, you know, house. So I use all the most expensive legal house in this country. So whenever I talk to them, like $33,000, $1,000 for 1 minute. So we don't have time to say hello. So we just go to the point, and then close up conversation very fast. And and we have to get like independent engineering company to verify our sunlight. And so then we have to get new partners. So they said to me, you have to get new partner, which is not just Kun Wandi. So we have to, you have to choose like international investor. So they give me 2 names. One is World Bank, and one is ADB. So since I stopped business I already retired for 2-3 years. I don't know any of this. So I Google. And then I found that World Bank has office in Hong Kong, Philippines, and I choose World Bank because ADB is ASEAN. So World Bank is look globally, so then choose World Bank. So then took me 6 months to convince World Bank to become our partner, which is International Finance Corporation, on the first project till the 5th project. So this is something that we have to not just have the money to develop any project. You have to make people believe in the project. and you have to convince them. And so after the first project was implemented on 21st April 2010, I cannot remember my first date, but I can remember my first day of COD. So, so I say whenever I talk to my husband, when is our marriage day, I cannot remember, but I am now remember the first day of the solar farm operation. So bank asked us to wait for 6 months. So then we have to wait for 6 months to see the sun, to understand how much we can produce from 7 megawatt install, and whether the project can pay back for the loan, and whether the project can continue for future, developments to the thing. So then it's so important that we even is difficult, but we have to make it happen. We have to have conventional, we have to have alternative energy, we have to have renewable energy, so for our better world in the future. So with 36 of our solar farms, we help the world reduce at least 200,000 tons CO2 of carbon. That's why this is bring me the awards of the UNFCCC for the climate change. And so this is not just helping the local people. We highlight 20,000 people in the past 5 years and train them of everything, carrying the modules, making the system connected, and working with the utilities to understand how does it work, because solar energy will produce as soon as we have the sun shining into our solar farm. So every day after 21st of April, 6 months, our performance is better than the bank forecast 20%. So then 2010, we are able to develop only 1 project. And so 2011, 4 projects, 2012, 4 projects, 13, 14 projects, and just last year, recently, 13 projects. So then 365 days, we never have time to rest and working along with the sun, and from morning till evening. So our office hour is sunrise to sunset, and we 365 days, so you're welcome to join us.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wendy.
So this is something that we think is so important, that we have to have some other alternative energy to help to lift up the quality of people in this part of the world. I've been visiting many times in Myanmar. It's not just they don't have energy. They don't have even grid connected to the village. So then we have to build up 1 gas power plant. You may take like 3-4 years, but to build up the grid connected to each of the village, it takes like 10-20 years. So this is the most difficult path to get energy to these people. So solar energy is the answer. You can do distributed generation, you can do 1 megawatts here, you can do 2 megawatts there, you can do even less, and then you can set up your small grid, and then supporting in the area where you want to get the people to get energy. So this is something that the beauty of solar, and nowadays we can prove to not just Thailand, every other country in ASEAN coming up with the renewable energy plan. So then Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, even Cambodia.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Sankey, I'm going to move to a slightly different topic. So in the last 6 months, what has really struck people when they look at the energy market is the enormous reduction in the price of oil. The price of oil has fallen something like 50%. This has led many upward revisions in GDP growth for a number of countries. At the same time, the shale revolution in the United States, which at least China hopes to emulate, has led to an explosion in the supply of natural gas. The United States is moving from a net importer to very soon a net exporter, possibly self-sufficient. This is a revolution in America. It's talked about a lot all over the world. So the question is, these developments, the shale revolution and the fall in the price of oil, what are the implications of those for the alternative energy market?
Right. Yeah, our belief is that the impact of this is going to be quite minimal, and at least the immediate evidence that we see is, I can cite two facts. One is last year was also a record year for the United States in terms of number of solar installations, which also corresponded with the low prices on gas. And the second thing is, while the oil prices were going down from $95 to $57, SunEdison added 1,000 megawatts of pipeline of new projects right across the world. I think there are several reasons for this. One is that renewables is, power sector in general is a highly regulated sector, so it doesn't necessarily respond quickly to price signals in the market. A lot of it is driven by policy intent and very specific motivation. So if you, just one example is India has stated goal of doing 100 gigawatts now. They're not looking at the oil price or gas prices. There are various strategic reasons why India wants to do 100 gigawatts of solar, and they are sort of clearly embarking on that path. China has declared a similar intent, right? Japan, because of the nuclear disaster, they want to replace nuclear with solar. I think there are very clear strategic reasons, and climate change is one among them, right? But for various countries, for various reasons, that's driving the renewables market. The second thing is that the levelized cost of energy for solar or wind, for that matter, is already at or close to what we call wholesale parity. So wind in India is already lower than wholesale coal parity if you use imported coal to produce power, right? Solar energy is actually very close. If you look at the levelized cost of energy for solar, it's close to 10 to 11 cents per kilowatt hour. Coal, based on imported coal for recently tendered out capacities, is in the 9-cent range, right? So we are already seeing solar and wind being at close to the kind of prices that we see in the wholesale markets. I feel that overall the impact of reduction of oil and gas prices is going to be quite minimal.
Just as a data point on that, if you look, obviously I don't know as much about solar since I work in wind, but the wind from 1984 until 2009, reduction was 64%, and then from 2009 to 2014, so the last 5 years, another 15%. And so what you see in renewables is a trend that is very clearly continuing to reduce the cost of energy in that same time period, even though there's been short-term fluctuations, fossil fuels has been going the other direction. So there's a very positive trend.
Okay, Mr. Buffet, would you like to continue with this conversation? So we've talked a little bit about how important it is for the country for reducing poverty, for climate change we haven't really touched on, but the bottom line is you need to be profitable to be successful. So Chris, how optimistic are you about the ability of the renewables to compete with conventional energy sources in the regions that you know, in the ASEAN region?
Yes. So as I look, the region that I cover is from China to Japan to New Zealand, Australia, Pakistan, India, and all of Southeast Asia. So I always joke with my own board and say that more than 2/3 of the world's population is there. We need to get Vestas that way too. But anyway, the long-term dynamics when you look at renewables in this area, and you look at, it varies country by country because each country has a different energy mix. So as we were talking about before, with Thailand being 70% towards gas, but potential future shortages. Every single country has a little bit of a different dynamic when you look at that. However, the one consistent thing that when you look at renewables, whether it's wind, whether it's solar, is the trend of continued lowering cost of energy, as I was describing before. And particularly when you have growing energy demand where you have to do new installations to match that, renewables tends to win over and over again. And that's not just because governments have a much more green conscious state, it's because it's actually a better economic decision. What many people don't realize, and I'm not sure the study's been done in Asia Pacific, but they just recently did a study in Europe that shows the amount of true subsidies that actually subsidize the fossil fuel industry. Things such as free water, things such as the impact on the environment, CO2 emissions, the cost that goes into helping to clean up the water that they produce. Where in places like solar, wind, you're not doing and having those same things. And so those dynamics, particularly when you have what we have in Asia Pacific and the China region, is growing energy demand and the need to install. Where renewables have a more difficult issue is, and this is where you see in the mature markets such as the US or Europe, where you're not adding new capacity, now you're competing purely on the cost of fuel. That's where it's more difficult, and that's why we have to continue to just drive down the cost of energy. And so it's two very, very different mindsets. One is operating off of a finite supply. Finite supply generally over time drives price up. Here we're dealing with technologies that are really driving the cost of energy down, and that's the long-term game. Are we there 100% yet? No, but all the trends are in the right direction, and that's why most of the investors that you look at, the big funds in the world, are betting on wind and solar as they look ahead to the future.
Thank you. Back to Dr. Wandi. So we talked about the prices and the possibilities. What do you predict will be the future mix of renewables and fossil fuels in the near future in Thailand? And as a follow-up to that, what do you think the government can do to expand the role for renewables? As an aside, the share of renewables in total energy in the world as a whole, according to the OECD, is expected to be quite high, around nearly 20% by 2020. But for renewables to play the important role that they could play in reducing climate change and getting the temperature of the world not to go up by those 4 degrees, it would need to be not just 20, it would need to be, renewables would need to have at least a 30% share. And so the question is, what can government of Thailand do to help achieve that goal?
Yes, thank you. You met our Prime Minister this morning, so you can see how he support Thai tourism, Thai rice, and Thainess, and he also supporting solar energy, very strongly supporting renewable energies. So with the role of the government that we want to see is the clear policy. For example, we have the alternative energy plan. We want to see that the alternative energy plan is in the power development plan as a whole. So then we want to see clear number of megawatts in terms of solar. Actually, we are now revising our PDP. So instead of 2030 will be 2036. And energy consumption as today from 30,000 megawatts will rise to 70,000 megawatts in 2036. And I think government already give a very clear statement that 20% of the total energy consumption will be alternative energy and renewable energy. So then they are talking internally that they want to see solar like 10 gigawatts in terms of the number. If government give clear policy, so the private sector can study of the further investment or how to expand more of the business, not just in country but also in ASEAN. So this is the role of the government that we expect to see, and we already work very close with them. Thai government and private sector, we are considered PPP. So then we exchange information and we share experience and we can talk. So then even he is military prime minister. So then this is time that we try to push, so because of the law and plan and energy level of the country being very clear. So, and for the energy mix to be fair for the country, energy security is the most important thing. So we have to mix between all kinds, and as Chris mentioned, it is absolutely correct that each of the country has a different portfolio of the resources that each country has to set or tailor-made themselves into a mix of energy. So I want to see 30% of the gas. I want to see 40% of renewable, and I want to see 30% of hydro or coal, things like that, because of renewable energy, alternative energy is considered clean and one-time investment. And I also believe that is now solar considered grid parity, because we've been operating 5 years already for our solar farms. We see how many kilowatt hours we can produce from 1 kilowatt peak, and we can see that certain area that we should promoting solar. We don't have much wind. So our strong wind is next to Parliament. So there's a lot of talks, but Thailand, we don't have much of the wind power. So then solar seems to be number one choice. So this is something that I really want to convince our government, and I want to see the country development plan for power is mixed to this renewable energy 40%, and maybe solar 30%.
Thank you. Mr. Sankey, I'd like to turn to you. What can the private sector, in particular, what can individual companies do to increase their market share and the market penetration of renewables, particularly in emerging markets where it's lower than in the more mature markets?
Right. So obviously we have a very important role to play as a private sector. As Kunwandi was explaining, I think that the pain that she had to go through to get the banks comfortable with the nature of solar, get them comfortable with non-recourse financing. I think it's something that we faced in our early days as well, here in Thailand as well as in India, where they were just not familiar with this asset class. I think the last 5 years, of course, has helped in that sense. So getting the first and the most critical thing is financing. I think private sector there, by ensuring that they choose the right technology, build the right quality assets that continue to perform, and give banks the comfort of doing non-recourse financing is critical. So there's a very important role that the private sector has. The second thing is the potential is quite enormous across the region, across Asia. So the companies do need to build capacity, to be able to deliver, to develop these projects, finance them, and construct them in short cycle time. So we at SunEdison, we are really working on applying lean methodologies to reducing cycle times of projects. So recently we built a 100 megawatt plant, solar plant in Chile in under 3 months, from groundbreaking all the way to commissioning and interconnection of the power plant. So in some sense, given that solar is modular and it's a short gestation technology, so you can quickly build capacity. So I think there's a very important role that the private sector has to play in improving efficiencies. And the third thing is, we have to continue to work with the governments to help shape regulation, proactively. And this is something that, all the industry has been doing. We at SunEdison have been doing quite proactively across various markets. I think one of the things that will be critical as we go forward and we look at the 40% type of level of penetration is developing the right regulatory frameworks to manage the infirm nature of renewable generation, right? So having the right policy frameworks for real-time balancing markets that help maintain grid stability, Also, I think private sector probably has an important role to play in working with the government to roll out the transmission and distribution infrastructure. Lastly, I would say that solar especially is beautiful in the sense that it is extremely modular. You can do a small solar home system that can power a home, all the way to building. Our largest plant is one in Colorado that we recently commissioned, is about 260 megawatts, single location, right? So it's the same technology, that you're using. So that's the beauty of solar. So it can truly enable distributed generation, and in that sense, it is, I think, important for the private players to develop the right business models, the right channels to deliver, install, and also get these systems financed in the right financing frameworks to truly enable distributed generation at a large scale, which is particularly relevant for Asia as it continues to build out its energy infrastructure.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask Chris Beaufait, who's been working for a very long time in China, about how Vestas finds ways to compete in the Chinese landscape. And in particular, I want to talk about China's industrial policy. So last year was a milestone for China. It invested and created more renewables capacity than it did in coal. A lot of that was through a range of industrial policies that promoted the development of wind and solar through subsidies, through tax breaks, through low-interest loans. Would you care to comment on those policies? And in particular, how do you, as a private company, sort of respond to these kinds of industrial policies?
Sure. As Professor Harrison was talking about China and the experience they've been going through, it was not too terribly long ago that China was nascent in renewables. And now, particularly in wind, China last year represented 45% of the total world installation in wind. So by far the #1 country in installations last year. There are multiple reasons for that, but what I would say that drives that sort of investment, with China, there's a very interesting trend that's occurring. Of course, many of those installations were done through state-owned enterprise, and it comes down to the economics that I was talking about before, the cost of energy getting to the point where installing wind is whenever you're building new plants, very much on par and has many more benefits than some of the other technologies that are out there, particularly fossil fuels. And so one of the things that a government can do, and China has recognized this, is these are 20, 25-year assets. When you're investing in a renewable wind farm or solar farm, they're long-life assets. Stability really matters if you're an investor in those items. And so I mentioned the state-owned enterprise. There's stability of power. What's happening now in China is many of the policies are also now incentivizing much more private investment into that as well. And so we're seeing some very interesting trends along those, and it's because of the stability of things such as being able to get power purchase, we call them PPAs, power purchase agreements. So if you spend the money to invest in an asset, and whether it's solar or wind, the economics are similar. A lot of capital expenditure up front, free fuel, but you got to recoup that initial investment. If you can't have the stability of infrastructure and certainty that you can recoup that investment, customers, such as both, here would not invest. And that's what I see China has done a lot of. The second thing that's happened is China took a really big approach. They kind of pushed the I believe button, as I would say. They installed gigawatts and gigawatts of wind. And now that they have a very, very large installed base, more than 100 gigawatts of wind alone, they've realized they now need to focus from a focus of investment in assets to now how do you optimize and operate those assets. So there's another very interesting trend that China has come out with, which is a standards aspect. So there are many manufacturers of wind turbines in China, but China has recognized a 20-year asset needs to have quality, reliability, and certainty of power production. whether it's for the national security of the country and the energy that it provides, or for investors that need that security. And so they've also released many standards around quality. That's very good for a company like Vestas, given our track record and our history within wind. The last piece of this then also comes down to operations and maintenance. And so we're also seeing a cycle as the global installed base of renewables has gone up. There are so many more people operating renewable assets. There's a very big business and a lot of incentive and opportunity around how do you optimize those assets. And that is what is driving a lot of what you've seen in new policy. And a lot of it, to be really has developed since about 2008 or 2009. And so in Asia, that's a long time. Whenever I talk to my European or US friends about that, that seems like, oh, well, that was yesterday. The reality is, as we know in our market, that's very quick. And that is what we expect. That's the pace we run at. And your regulation to drive that sort of investment has to adapt that fast to what the investors are actually seeing in their market and what gives them comfort. You heard as Dr. Wandi was saying, because we see it as we go project by project, one of the most difficult things here is the debt side. There is more than enough equity out in the world that is willing to invest in renewables. The debt side, when you get to the risk side, and what do they look at? They look at government policy, they look at secured cash flows, they look at these what we call power purchase agreements. That is how governments really continue to incentivize, and China's done that very well.
Thank you. I think we should join me in giving a round of applause to our panelists.